I lay freezing on the asphalt as the tail lights of my sister luxury SUV disappeared into the blinding Aspen blizzard. The next morning, when she strolled into the hospital clutching a designer coffee and casually asked the doctor how I was doing, he did not give her a medical update. He looked her dead in the eye and delivered a single sentence that drained the color completely from her face. My name is Riley. I am 33 years old, and until that freezing night, I still held on to the foolish hope that family meant something. I had no idea that nearly freezing to death would be the exact catalyst I needed to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Aspen in December is supposed to be a winter wonderland for the wealthy. But when you are standing outside a restaurant in a cocktail dress, while a freak blizzard dumps 3 inches of snow an hour, it becomes a frozen nightmare. My lungs were burning. The freezing air triggered a severe asthma attack, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. My fingers were numb as I stumbled toward the black SUV idling near the valet stand. Inside the heated leather interior sat my younger sister Kelsey and her husband Jamal. Jamal, an African-American hedge fund broker, whose arrogance was only matched by his collection of expensive watches, sat in the driver's seat, revving the engine impatiently. I banged my freezing fist against the tinted glass. I could barely stand. Hypothermia was already clouding my thoughts. Kelsey, wearing a thick mink coat, finally rolled down the passenger window exactly 1 inch. A blast of warm air from their climate control hit my freezing face. "Please," I gasped, my chest heaving as I struggled for oxygen. "I cannot breathe. I need to get to the hospital." Kelsey sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as she adjusted her diamond earrings in the mirror. "Find your own Uber, Riley. We are already late for the fund launch dinner and you are acting embarrassing." Jamal leaned over, his voice dripping with the same condescension he used on anyone he deemed beneath his tax bracket. "Look, your sister has an important image to maintain tonight. We cannot show up to a multi-million-dollar networking event smelling like hospital antiseptic because you forgot an inhaler. It is not a good look." Kelsey reached into her designer purse. "Here's a 50. Go wait inside the lobby or something." She shoved a crumpled $50 bill through the crack in the window. The paper fluttered down into the snow at my feet. Before I could even choke out another plea, Kelsey pressed the button. The window glided shut, cutting off the warm air and sealing me out. Jamal slammed his foot on the gas. The heavy tires spun, kicking up a spray of icy slush that hit my bare legs as the SUV sped away into the whiteout conditions. I fell to my knees. The cold was consuming me, creeping up my limbs and stealing the last of my strength. As my vision began to blur and the edges of the world turned gray, my mind started playing tricks on me. The roar of the wind faded, replaced by the sounds of clinking crystal glasses and loud laughter from our family Christmas dinner 3 years ago. I saw Jamal sitting at the head of my parents' dining table in Denver, swirling an expensive glass of scotch. He was holding court, while my parents, Thomas and Brenda, hung on his every word. So Riley Jamal had mocked loudly across the table, making sure everyone heard. "Still playing on computers in that basement apartment of yours. It is a shame you dropped out of your master's program in economics. You could have been working for me at the firm doing data entry or something." Kelsey had laughed, her high-pitched, practiced influencer laugh. "Oh, babe, she does not understand real finance. She just likes typing colorful code on a dark screen. Leave her alone." My father, Thomas, had chimed in, his voice full of disappointment. "Jamal is right, Riley. You should look at what Jamal is doing. Building a real career. Managing actual wealth. Not wasting time on useless software hobbies that will never pay the bills." They had all laughed. The unified chorus of their disdain echoed in my freezing ears. They thought I was a failure because I did not wear a suit or play the corporate game. They had absolutely no idea what I was actually building in that basement. They did not know that my useless software hobby was the foundation of Aegis Systems, a platform that was quietly revolutionizing global supply chain management. But lying there in the snow, none of that wealth or success mattered. I was just a woman, suffocating in a blizzard, abandoned by her own blood. The memory faded, replaced by the biting reality of the storm. My chest stopped heaving. My body surrendered to the freezing temperature. The $50 bill they threw at me was buried under fresh snowfall. I collapsed completely against the frozen asphalt, my cheek resting on the ice. The darkness closed in rapidly. Just as my consciousness slipped away entirely, the ground began to vibrate. A low, heavy rumbling sound cut through the howling wind. Two massive, blinding yellow headlights pierced the whiteout, moving steadily down the road right toward my motionless body. It was a city snowplow. I could not move. I could not scream. The giant steel blades scraped against the pavement, pushing a mountain of snow closer and closer to where I lay. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, knowing I was alone. But fate had a different plan. The deafening screech of air brakes shattered the night as the massive truck ground to a halt mere inches from my face. Heavy boots crunched rapidly through the thick snow. A harsh spotlight washed over my frozen body, and a deep voice shouted into a radio calling for emergency medical services immediately. The driver wrapped a heavy thermal blanket around my shivering frame, lifting me from the icy road. I felt the jarring motion of being carried before the blast of the truck heater washed over my face. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, signaling my rescue, I drifted into a deep unconsciousness, completely unaware of the legal storm that was about to hit my family. This moment of sheer terror was the end of the weak woman they knew. By morning, the tables would turn, and my retribution would officially begin. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor pulled me slowly from the dark void. I forced my heavy eyelids open, squinting painfully against the harsh fluorescent lights of the Denver Hospital Intensive Care Unit. A nasal cannula delivered crisp oxygen into my raw lungs, and an intravenous drip pushed warm fluids into my frozen veins. Every single muscle ached with a deep, bone-chilling pain that reminded me of how close I had come to dying on that icy asphalt. I turned my head slowly, taking in the cold, sterile white walls and the humming machinery keeping me stable. I was finally alive. I had actually survived the blizzard. But before I could even process the absolute miracle of my own breathing, the heavy wooden door to my room flew open. There was no gentle, friendly knock, no hesitant peeking around the corner to see if I was awake. The door banged against the doorstop with a violent thud. My mother Brenda marched angrily into the hospital room, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. My sister Kelsey trailed right behind her, furiously typing on her smartphone. Neither of them rushed to my bedside. Neither of them asked how I was feeling or if I was in pain. Instead, my mother stood at the foot of my hospital bed, her face twisted into a scowl of pure irritation. "You always have to ruin everything, do you not? Riley," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you have any idea how much chaos you caused last night?" Jamal had very important clients flying in from out of state for his fund launch, and we had to leave the gala early because the hospital kept calling us. Kelsey did not even bother to look up from her bright screen. She flipped her perfectly highlighted blonde hair over her shoulder and sighed loudly. "Seriously, Riley, it was just so embarrassing for us. People were asking where we were going, and Jamal had to quickly make up some ridiculous excuse about a family emergency. You could have just stayed in the car or found a coffee shop to sit in until the storm passed. Instead, you pull this massive dramatic stunt and drag us right into it." I stared at them completely numb. My chest tightened, but not from the asthma. It was the sheer, suffocating weight of their terrible narcissism. I had been freezing to death, gasping for air, and their only concern was a cocktail party. I remained silent, letting the rhythmic beeping of the monitor fill the room. My silence only seemed to agitate my mother further. She paced the small, cramped space between the door and my bed, waving her hands in exasperation. "This is exactly what I am talking about," she continued, her voice rising in pitch. "Ever since you foolishly quit your prestigious master's program in economics, you have been completely out of control. We begged you to stay in school. We begged you to get a real corporate job like Jamal. But no, you had to drop out and do what? Pathetic freelance coding in a dingy apartment, Look at your younger sister. My mother gestured proudly toward Kelsey, who was now checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. Kelsey has built a massive loyal following online. She is a respected lifestyle influencer. She works hard to maintain her brand and support Jamal in his high-level career. And you just drag us down with these desperate, pathetic cries for attention. If you had just stayed in grad school, maybe you could easily afford a reliable car, instead of begging your sister for rides and making a huge scene in the middle of a dangerous blizzard. The absolute sheer audacity of her cruel words washed over me. I looked at Kelsey. Her luxurious, fake influencer lifestyle was funded entirely by Jamal and his highly leveraged hedge fund. They lived on credit and social climbing, and my mother absolutely worshipped them for it. Meanwhile, they foolishly thought I was scraping by on gig work, living in a decoy apartment to hide my wealth from the very people standing in my room. They thought I was a failure because I did not wear a suit or boast about my income on the internet. I felt a cold, calculating calm settle over me. The girl who used to cry, seeking their validation, died in that snowstorm. The woman lying in this hospital bed was the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Systems. I was worth more than Jamal could ever dream of managing. And I was done playing the scapegoat. I finally found my voice. It was raspy and weak from the cold, but my tone was absolute ice. I did not make a scene, Mother. I was dying. Kelsey deliberately locked me out of the car. Kelsey scoffed, putting her expensive phone away. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Riley. I rolled the window up because the snow was ruining the leather seats. You were fine. You are just trying to play the victim like you always do. Before I could even respond, the heavy door swung open again. This time it was the attending physician. But he was not alone. Flanking him stood two uniformed officers from the Denver Police Department. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My mother froze, her hand hovering over her designer bag. Kelsey took a step back, her confident posture suddenly faltering. The doctor walked past them without a word and checked my vitals on the monitor. He then turned slowly and glared directly at my sister. The silence in the room was deafening. He crossed his arms and delivered the words that would change our family dynamic forever. "She is lucky to be alive," he said, his voice booming. "And we know exactly why she almost was not." The snowplow that found her had a dashcam and it recorded everything. Kelsey turned deathly pale. The police officer stepped forward, blocking Kelsey from moving any closer to my bed. "Ma'am, we are going to need you to step out into the hallway. We have a few questions for you regarding the footage from the city snowplow." Kelsey backed away, her hands shaking violently as she gripped her designer purse. She looked at our mother with wide, terrified eyes. Brenda immediately went on the defensive, puffing out her chest and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the officer. "You cannot be serious," Brenda yelled. "You are not questioning my daughter. Do you have any idea who her husband is? He is launching a massive hedge fund tonight. She does not have time for this ridiculous harassment." The officer did not flinch. He simply gestured toward the door. "The choice is yours, ma'am. You can answer our questions in the hallway, or you can answer them in the back of a squad car." The color drained from Brenda's face as she grabbed Kelsey by the arm and hurried out of the room, casting one final venomous glare in my direction. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the steady hum of the heart monitor. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, rattling breath of the supplemental oxygen. The relief was entirely short-lived. Less than an hour passed before the peace was shattered once again. The door did not just open. It was shoved violently inward, hitting the wall with a loud crack. My father Thomas marched into the intensive care unit. He was wearing his expensive country club golf attire, clearly furious that his morning tea time had been interrupted. Right on his heels was Jamal, looking immaculate in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. Trailing behind them was a man I did not recognize. He wore a cheap, shiny suit and had the predatory look of a defense attorney who specialized in making wealthy people's problems quietly disappear. My father did not ask if I was in pain. He did not ask if I had sustained any permanent lung damage from the freezing temperatures. He marched straight to the side of my hospital bed, snatched a crisp document from the lawyer's hands, and threw it directly onto my lap. "Sign this," Thomas demanded, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "Read it and sign it right now." I looked down at the paper resting on my thin hospital blanket. It was a pre-drafted sworn affidavit. I scanned the first few lines. The document stated that I was delirious from an adverse reaction to asthma medication. It claimed that I became erratic, demanded to be let out of the vehicle on the highway, and wandered into the snowstorm entirely on my own. It explicitly stated that Kelsey had begged me to stay inside and was driving away only to find emergency help. It was a complete and total fabrication designed to absolve them of leaving me for dead. "You want me to commit perjury?" I asked, my voice hoarse but steady. Jamal let out a loud, mocking scoff from the foot of my bed. He checked his diamond Rolex and sighed loudly, as if my near-death experience was severely cutting into his busy schedule. "Stop being dramatic, Riley. It is a simple waiver. Just sign the paper so we can all move on with our lives. I have a multi-million-dollar fund launch tonight, and I cannot have my investors opening their phones to see my wife trending on the local news for a felony investigation. It is bad for business." The lawyer stepped forward, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket and holding it out to me. "It is the best path forward, Miss Wilson. A lengthy legal battle benefits no one. Just sign on the line, and the police will drop the reckless endangerment investigation immediately." I ignored the lawyer and looked right at my father. He stood tall and rigid, his jaw clenched tight. "You want me to lie to the police to protect a man who left me to freeze to death on the side of a highway?" Thomas slammed his fist down on the bedside table, rattling my plastic water pitcher. "I will not let you tear this family apart out of jealousy, Riley. You have been holding a grudge against your sister for years. Jamal is building an empire. His hedge fund is the crown jewel of this family. I have leveraged my own retirement and mortgaged my properties to back his investments. If his fund goes under because you want to play the victim and spook his investors, I will lose everything. You are going to sign that paper, and you are going to tell the cops you hallucinated." Jamal smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. He crossed his arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Let us be honest, Thomas. She has always been bitter, ever since she washed out of the corporate world." Jamal looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "You could not cut it in real finance, Riley. You could not handle the pressure or the intellect required to build actual wealth. So you quit your master's degree and retreated to your little basement apartment to code websites for pennies. You have been seething with jealousy watching me succeed where you failed. And now you see a desperate chance to drag us down to your level. I'm not going to let a broke college dropout ruin my life. Just sign the paper, and maybe I will write you a check to cover your little hospital bill." I looked at the three men standing in my room. My father was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect his financial interests. Jamal was dripping with an unearned arrogance, betting his entire life on shorting companies while claiming to be a financial genius. And the sleazy lawyer was just waiting to collect his hourly rate. They were so incredibly confident. They truly believed I was a weak, helpless freelancer who could be bullied into submission. They thought I was a failure because I did not brag about my achievements at their shallow dinner parties. They had no idea that the broke college dropout they were mocking possessed enough capital to buy and sell Jamal's entire firm before lunch. The lawyer impatiently thrust the silver pen closer to my face. "Please, Miss Wilson, we do not have all day." I stared at the pen. Then I reached out and calmly slapped it away. It clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor, rolling under the bed. I picked up the fraudulent waiver from my lap, crumpled it into a tight ball, and dropped it over the side of the mattress. My father's face turned purple with rage. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" I did not answer him. Instead, I reached over and firmly pressed the red nurse call button strapped to my bed rail. A voice crackled through the intercom speaker above my head. "Yes, Miss Wilson, do you need assistance?" I looked Jamal dead in the eye and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Security. There are 3 men in my room actively tampering with a witness in a felony investigation. Send the lead detective in right now." The intercom clicked off, and the silence that followed lasted only a second before the heavy door swung open again. Two large security guards stepped into the room, followed closely by the lead detective who had been waiting in the hallway. My father dropped his aggressive posture instantly, trying to smooth the lapels of his golf shirt to regain some semblance of authority. The sleazy lawyer took a hasty step backward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Jamal just glared at me, his jaw tight with fury. The detective did not mince words. He pointed toward the corridor and ordered the three men to step away from my bed immediately. My father tried to protest using his deep, authoritative voice that usually commanded boardrooms and country clubs. He claimed they were just having a private family discussion about my health, but the detective was having none of it. He informed them that interfering with a victim, providing a statement in an active felony investigation, was a quick way to end up in handcuffs right next to Kelsey. The security guards moved in, placing their hands firmly on my father and Jamal. Watching them being physically escorted out of the intensive care unit was a surreal experience. Jamal fought against the guards' grip, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. He shot one final venomous look over his shoulder before the heavy doors swung shut behind them. I was left alone with the detective, who simply nodded at me, pulled up a chair, and asked me to recount every single detail of the night before. I gave him the complete truth. I told him about the asthma attack, the freezing temperature, the $50 bill Kelsey threw in the snow, and the exact way Jamal had accelerated the SUV while I was begging for my life. The detective took meticulous notes, thanked me for my cooperation, and assured me that the district attorney was already reviewing the dashcam footage. Once he left, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright began to fade. I sank back into the sterile hospital pillows, the dull ache in my chest reminding me of the brutal cold. But the quiet did not last long. My cell phone, resting on the plastic tray table beside my bed, vibrated violently. It buzzed once, twice, then began a relentless stream of notifications. I reached over and picked it up. The screen lit up with a barrage of angry text messages. The first was a long paragraph from my father, Thomas. I read the words and felt a momentary hollow ache in my stomach. The text was entirely devoid of any paternal warmth or concern for my near-death experience. It was a formal, cold declaration. You have chosen to humiliate your sister and jeopardize the financial stability of this entire family. We offered you an easy way out, but you want to play the victim. You are no longer welcome in our home. Do not contact your mother and do not expect another dime from us. You are officially cut off. Consider yourself disowned. I stared at the glowing text. A year ago, a message like that would have sent me into a desperate spiral of apologies. I would have called him begging for forgiveness, promising to fix everything, just to keep the peace. But today the words held no power over me. They were just empty threats from a man who valued his country club status more than his own daughter's life. Before I could even set the phone down, it began to ring. The caller identification displayed Jamal. I swiped the screen and answered, pressing the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the sharp, angry breaths coming from the other end of the line. You think you can play hardball with us? Riley. Jamal hissed, his voice low and vibrating with malice. You think calling security makes you powerful? You are nothing but a pathetic freelancer who cannot even afford her own health insurance. I kept my voice perfectly level. Is there a reason you are calling Jamal, or do you just enjoy hearing yourself speak? I'm calling to give you a reality check, he snapped. I just got off the phone with the bank. I froze the emergency credit card your parents let you keep in your wallet. The one you use to buy your cheap groceries when your little coding gigs dry up. You are entirely cut off from the family accounts. Let us see how a broke college dropout pays a $40,000 intensive care unit bill by herself. His taunt hit exactly the nerve he was aiming for, or at least the nerve he thought he was aiming for. For years, my family had kept me financially leashed. When I first dropped out of my master's program to build my software company, I lived in a tiny rundown apartment. I worked 20-hour days, surviving on cheap ramen and instant coffee. My parents had given me an emergency credit card connected to their account. I rarely used it, but whenever I did, they made sure to remind me of my poverty. At every family dinner, Jamal would loudly joke about how I was still on the family payroll. They loved keeping me in that box. It stroked their massive egos to have a struggling artist in the family, so they could feel superior about their own corporate success. They needed me to be poor so they could feel rich. Jamal continued his arrogant monologue, completely unaware that he was digging his own grave. You are going to be drowning in medical debt for the rest of your miserable life, Riley. The hospital will send you to collections. They will ruin whatever pathetic credit score you have managed to build. You are going to lose that garbage basement apartment and end up on the street. All because you were too jealous to just sign a simple piece of paper and let your sister go home. I listened to his cruel rant, and instead of crying, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. The smile turned into a soft chuckle. The chuckle grew into a full laugh. I laughed right into the receiver, the sound echoing brightly in the quiet hospital room. Are you crazy? Jamal demanded, his voice pitching up in frustration. What exactly is so funny to you? I took a deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my recovering lungs. You are funny, Jamal. You are so unbelievably predictable. You really think freezing a family credit card is going to destroy my life? It is a $40,000 bill, Riley, he spat back. You do not have that kind of cash. You never have. Who said I needed your credit card, Jamal? I asked, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear and reached over to my leather purse resting on the chair next to the bed. I unzipped the side pocket and reached inside my fingers, brushing past the cheap plastic emergency card my parents had given me. I bypassed it completely and pulled out a different card. It was sleek, heavy, and forged from solid black titanium. It caught the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room, gleaming with quiet, absolute power. The name engraved on the bottom was not just my name. It read, Riley Wilson, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. I pressed the phone back to my ear, running my thumb over the raised metal lettering. You should focus on your own financial problems, Jamal. I have a feeling you are going to need every penny you can get your hands on very soon. Have a great fund launch tonight. I ended the call before he could say another word and tossed the phone onto the bed. I looked down at the solid titanium corporate card resting in my palm. The days of playing the poor struggling sister were officially over. It was time to introduce them to the real me. I slipped out of the narrow hospital bed, entirely ignoring the lingering ache deep in my chest. The attending physician had just cleared my official discharge after running a final battery of respiratory tests to ensure the freezing temperatures had not caused permanent lung damage. I changed into the spare, comfortable clothes the hospital social worker had kindly provided, since my formal cocktail dress was completely ruined from the icy slush. I walked slowly down the brightly lit, sterile corridor toward the billing department. My borrowed boots squeaked softly against the pristine linoleum floor. The billing clerk was a middle-aged woman with tired, sympathetic eyes. She pulled up my patient chart and typed my name into her computer system. As the final invoice loaded onto her monitor, she winced visibly, her shoulders slumping. Miss Wilson, she started, her voice filled with genuine pity. Your emergency admittance and the intensive care unit bring your total to just over $42,000. I see you are listed in our system as a freelance worker without corporate insurance on file. We can absolutely set you up with a financial hardship payment plan today. We do not want you to stress about this. I smiled warmly at her, appreciating her kindness in a world that had shown me very little of it lately. That will not be necessary, I replied smoothly. I reached into my purse and bypassed the cheap plastic emergency credit card my family loved to hold over my head. Instead, I pulled out a heavy, sleek card forged from solid black titanium. I placed it on the counter where it landed with a solid metallic clink. The clerk looked confused, but she picked it up and swiped it through the payment terminal. The machine processed the massive charge for exactly 1 second before emitting a loud, cheerful beep. Approved. The clerk stared at the screen in absolute shock. I signed the printed receipt, thanked her profusely for her help, and walked away, leaving her staring wide-eyed at the string of zeros on her monitor. The automatic glass doors slid open, releasing me into the crisp, bright Denver morning. The brutal blizzard had finally passed, leaving behind mountains of brilliant white snow and a biting chill in the clear air. I pulled my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders and walked confidently toward the designated patient pickup zone. I did not have to wait long to see them. Parked illegally in the loading zone was Jamal's gleaming silver Porsche Panamera. Jamal was leaning casually against the hood sipping a specialized latte, while Kelsey sat in the passenger seat scrolling mindlessly through her phone. They were waiting for me. They had deliberately parked right where I would be forced to walk past them. Jamal spotted me, and a cruel, highly satisfied smirk stretched across his face. He pushed himself off the hood of the expensive sports car and took a few swaggering steps in my direction. "Well, look who finally got kicked out onto the street," Jamal sneered, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his coffee. "Did the billing department security guards have to physically throw you out, Riley? You should have just signed the waiver Thomas gave you. Now you are bankrupt and walking home in the freezing cold." Kelsey rolled down her window, leaning out with a dramatically mocked pout. "Do not be mean, Jamal," she whined, her tone dripping with thick, fake sympathy. "Riley, if you apologize to Mom and Dad right now and call the police to officially retract your statement, we might let you sit in the back seat. I will even buy you an Uber from our massive house back to your little basement apartment." I did not break my stride. I walked straight toward them, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. I did not look angry or defeated. I looked entirely bored. "I am not walking anywhere, Kelsey," I said smoothly, stopping a few feet away from the Porsche. "And I strongly suggest you two enjoy this expensive car while you still can." Jamal let out a loud barking laugh, tilting his head back. "Are you threatening me with what exactly? You have absolutely nothing. You are a broke nobody who just lost her only financial lifeline. You are completely finished." Before Jamal could finish his arrogant monologue, the low, powerful hum of a massive engine cut through the crisp morning air. A sleek, custom-armored black Cadillac Escalade pulled smoothly into the loading zone, completely dwarfing Jamal's flashy sports car. The heavily tinted windows were completely opaque, concealing the interior. The heavy vehicle came to a silent halt directly in front of me, blocking Jamal from my view. Jamal stopped laughing immediately. Kelsey lowered her phone, her mouth falling slightly open in confusion. The driver's side door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out. It was Marcus, my personal head of corporate security. He moved with swift military precision, walking around the front of the massive SUV and opening the rear passenger door for me. He offered a respectful, deferential nod. "Good morning, boss," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the cold air. "The private jet is fueled and prepped for the flight back to Silicon Valley whenever you are ready." "Good morning, Marcus," I replied, stepping effortlessly into the plush, heated leather interior of the Escalade. I settled into the luxurious back seat. Marcus leaned in and handed me a sleek, encrypted tablet. "The quarterly financial reports for Aegis Systems are loaded and ready for your review," boss Marcus stated professionally. "Our new B2B supply chain software integration in the European markets exceeded all logistical projections by 12%. Our current valuation has officially crossed the $4 billion threshold. The board is thrilled." "Excellent work," I said, taking the tablet and glancing at the soaring revenue charts. "Tell the board I will review the new global acquisition targets during the flight." I looked out the open door past Marcus. Jamal was standing completely frozen on the sidewalk. His custom coffee cup was tilted dangerously in his hand, spilling warm latte directly onto the pristine toe of his expensive Italian loafer. He was completely oblivious to the mess. He was staring at the armored SUV, at the imposing security detail, and at the glowing financial charts on my tablet. The absolute sheer shock radiating from his face was priceless. Marcus closed my door with a heavy, secure thud, completely shutting out the cold air and sealing away my toxic family. As the Escalade smoothly pulled away from the curb, I glanced at the rearview monitor mounted on the partition. Jamal was shaking his head rapidly, talking frantically to Kelsey. He was violently pointing at my departing vehicle with wide, panicked eyes. He was already aggressively rationalizing what he had just witnessed. I knew exactly how his arrogant mind worked. He undoubtedly assumed that I was simply dating some wealthy tech executive. He firmly believed the armored car, the professional driver, and the deferential title belonged to some rich boyfriend who was treating me well. He severely underestimated the actual monster he had just awakened. He had absolutely no idea that I was the billionaire architect of my own empire, and my retribution had only just begun. 2 days later, the reality of my newly declared war settled into the quiet corners of my basement apartment. I sat at my battered laminate kitchen counter, cradling a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee. The apartment was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface, a dark, cramped subterranean box, with exposed heating pipes and a thrift store couch that smelled faintly of old dust. I lived here entirely by choice. In the highly competitive, cutthroat world of Silicon Valley enterprise software, maintaining a low profile was my greatest strategic advantage. While other tech founders bought massive glass mansions and flashed their wealth on magazine covers, I stayed completely invisible. The disguise kept my aggressive corporate competitors completely in the dark. And more importantly, it kept my parasitic family entirely unaware of my massive fortune. A loud, aggressive pounding on my flimsy wooden front door shattered the morning silence. I did not flinch. I simply tapped the spacebar on my laptop, bringing up the hidden security camera feed I had installed in the hallway. Jamal was standing outside my door. He was pacing back and forth, running a hand over his perfectly groomed hair. He looked deeply agitated. The immaculate composure he usually projected was fraying at the edges. I took a slow sip of my coffee, stood up, and unbolted the door. Jamal pushed his way inside without waiting for an invitation. He immediately grimaced, bringing a scented handkerchief to his nose, as if the very air in my apartment was deeply offensive to him. He brushed invisible dirt off his custom-tailored cashmere overcoat and looked around the small living room with absolute, undisguised disgust. "How do you live in this absolute squalor, Riley?" he sneered, kicking the leg of my second-hand coffee table with his expensive leather shoe. "It smells like damp cardboard and failure in here. I am amazed the city has not condemned this entire building." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "Are you here to offer interior design advice, Jamal? Or is there another reason you are banging on my door at 7 in the morning?" He scoffed, pacing the short length of the worn rug. "Do not play games with me. I saw your little stunt at the hospital, that rented armored car and the fake titanium credit card. It was a cute trick, Riley. It really was. You probably blew the absolute last of your savings just to hire some actor to call you boss and try to intimidate me. But I am not an idiot. I know you are completely broke. I know you are drowning. And right now you are letting your pathetic bitterness ruin your sister's life." He stopped pacing and pointed a sharp, aggressive finger at me. "The police showed up at our house last night. They had a warrant for Kelsey. A felony warrant, Riley. Do you have any idea what kind of catastrophic damage a police raid does to a hedge fund manager reputation? My investors are getting incredibly nervous. They are calling me asking why my wife is being investigated for reckless endangerment and attempted manslaughter. You are destroying my massive fund launch over a simple family misunderstanding." I maintained a perfectly blank expression. "Leaving a person to freeze to death in a blizzard is not a misunderstanding, Jamal. It is a crime." Jamal ground his teeth, his jaw muscles popping under his skin. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy document watermarked with legal seals. He slammed it down onto my cheap kitchen counter. I looked at the bold print on the first page. It was the property deed to my late grandmother cabin in Lake Tahoe. My heart gave a tiny, involuntary flutter. That rustic wooden cabin nestled in the towering pine trees was the only place in the world where I had ever truly felt loved. My grandmother had spent hours sitting on that porch with me, encouraging my early coding projects, while the rest of the family mocked me. Since she passed away, Thomas had held the deed, holding it hostage, and repeatedly threatening to sell it to commercial developers just to punish me. "I am offering you a generous way out of your miserable life, Riley," Jamal said, his voice taking on a sickeningly sweet, benevolent tone. Drop the charges against Kelsey today. Call the detective and tell him you lied because you were angry. You sign the retraction, and I will personally convince your father to sign this deed over to you right now. It is fully paid off. You can live in the woods and play on your computer forever. But if you refuse, I will have Thomas sell it to my development company tomorrow. I will have that old rotting cabin bulldozed into dust, and I will pour a concrete parking lot right over your precious memories. I will build a massive rental property on the ashes. The choice is yours. He stared at me, expecting me to break. He expected tears or pleading. Instead, I just looked at him with cold, calculating pity. Jamal was so entirely consumed by his own arrogance that he slammed his briefcase shut with unnecessary violent force. The clasp failed. The leather flap flew open, and a thick manila folder slipped out, tumbling directly onto the floor at my feet. A dozen pages of highly confidential financial spreadsheets spilled across the cheap linoleum. I looked down. My sharp eyes instantly caught the bold logo printed at the top of the internal documents: Vanguard Freight. It was a struggling mid-tier logistics tech company. I scanned the red margin lines and the massive numerical projections. Jamal had heavily shorted their stock. He had leveraged his entire newly launched hedge fund, betting hundreds of millions of dollars on Vanguard Freight completely collapsing by the end of the month. It was an incredibly aggressive, massive gamble designed to make him a billionaire overnight. But Jamal did not know what I knew. He did not know that Aegis Systems was quietly finalizing a massive corporate acquisition of Vanguard Freight next Tuesday. The moment my company announced the buyout, Vanguard stock was going to skyrocket to the moon. Jamal's short position was going to completely implode instantly, wiping out his entire fund and leaving him with hundreds of millions in insurmountable debt. I slowly stepped over the spilled papers, my boots leaving a faint scuff mark on his precious financial projections. I looked up at him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. "Keep the cabin, Jamal," I said, my voice soft but ringing with absolute finality. "You are going to need a place to live very soon." Jamal snatched the manila folder from the floor, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and intense anger. He shoved the crumpled financial projections back into his leather briefcase and glared at me. "You are completely delusional, Riley," he spat, backing toward the door. "Enjoy your miserable life in this damp basement. When the medical collectors come knocking, do not bother calling us." He slammed the flimsy wooden door behind him so hard the hinges rattled. I listened to his heavy footsteps storming down the concrete hallway until the sound completely faded away. I immediately engaged the deadbolt and walked over to my desk. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner hidden beneath the edge of the wood. The false wall separating my tiny kitchen from the rest of the apartment slid silently open, revealing a state-of-the-art server rack and a massive curved monitor setup. This was the true nerve center of Aegis Systems. I dropped into my ergonomic chair and woke the screens up with a few rapid keystrokes. My mind was racing with the numbers I had just seen spilled across my floor. Vanguard Freight was a mid-tier logistics software company that had been struggling with cash flow for the past 3 quarters. They had a brilliant routing algorithm, but terrible management. Jamal had seen blood in the water. He was a corporate vulture. He never actually built anything of value. His entire career was based on finding vulnerable businesses and aggressively betting against them. He would short their stock, spread negative rumors to panic the shareholders, and watch the companies burn to the ground. He profited off mass layoffs and shattered livelihoods. And the most sickening part was that he was fueling his predatory hedge fund, using my father Thomas as his primary collateral. Thomas had blindly mortgaged his entire real estate portfolio and drained his retirement accounts just to fund Jamal and his toxic gambling. If Jamal failed, Thomas would lose absolutely everything. I reached for my encrypted secure smartphone and dialed my chief financial officer. David picked up on the first ring. "Good morning, Riley," David said, his voice crisp and alert. "I assume you are calling about the European market integration." "Change of plans, David. I said, pulling up the Vanguard Freight dossier on my center monitor. We are pivoting our immediate acquisition strategy. Pull up the file on Vanguard Freight right now. I heard the rapid clacking of a keyboard through the speaker. Vanguard Freight. David repeated, sounding slightly puzzled. We evaluated them 2 months ago. Their routing algorithm would perfectly complement our existing B2B supply chain infrastructure, but their management is a mess, and their stock is currently tanking. They are bleeding capital, Riley. We projected they would file for bankruptcy by the end of the fiscal year. Exactly, I said, my eyes scanning the live market data. They are currently the target of a massive coordinated short-selling campaign. A brand new hedge fund is heavily leveraged against them, betting hundreds of millions that Vanguard will go to zero by the end of the month. The fund manager has overextended his position dangerously. He is incredibly greedy and incredibly exposed. He thinks he has a guaranteed win because he does not know who is watching the board. There was a brief pause on the line as David processed the information. What is your directive, Riley? I want Aegis Systems to acquire Vanguard Freight. I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. And I do not want to wait for them to hit rock bottom. I want you to fast-track the acquisition immediately. Bypass the standard protracted negotiation windows. Go directly to their board of directors today and offer a massive premium. Offer them 40% above their current market valuation. Buy them out entirely in cash. David let out a low whistle of surprise. 40% above market value is a severely aggressive premium, Riley. It will cost us billions in liquid capital. We have the cash reserves to do it, but it is going to send an absolute shockwave through the entire tech sector. The market will go completely crazy. That is exactly the point, David, I replied, leaning back in my chair and watching the green and red numbers flash across my screens. Aegis Systems needs their proprietary routing algorithm to solidify our global supply chain monopoly. The premium we pay today will pay for itself tenfold within the next 2 quarters when we integrate their tech into our platform. But more importantly, the sheer speed and aggression of this buyout will trigger a catastrophic short squeeze. I opened a new window and pulled up the public filings for Jamal and his newly launched fund. I could see the exact structure of his disastrous financial trap. When you short a stock, you are borrowing shares to sell them, hoping to buy them back later at a lower price. But if the stock price suddenly skyrockets instead of dropping, the short seller is forced to buy the shares back at the inflated price to cover their position. Their potential losses are mathematically infinite. By purchasing Vanguard Freight at a massive premium, Aegis Systems would instantly drive the stock price through the roof. David was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him running the complex financial models on his end. Riley, he finally said, his tone turning incredibly serious. If we offer a 40% premium, the stock price will gap up instantly the second the market opens after the announcement. It will trigger automated margin calls across the board. If we push this acquisition through on Friday, anyone shorting Vanguard will be financially liquidated within minutes. I stared at the screen, looking at the name of my brother-in-law printed on the hedge fund charter. I thought about the freezing blizzard in Aspen. I thought about the crumpled $50 bill tossed into the snow while my lungs burned for oxygen. I thought about the sleazy defense lawyer pacing around my intensive care unit bed and the fake waiver they had aggressively tried to force me to sign. They thought they held all the cards. They thought they held all the power. They thought I was just a broke, defenseless girl they could easily discard and manipulate whenever it suited their selfish needs. They had absolutely no idea that I held the entire financial world in the palm of my hand. Make the announcement at exactly 8 p.m. on Friday. David let out a sharp breath over the encrypted line before responding with absolute professional precision. Consider it done, Riley. The acquisition will be finalized in total secrecy. The public announcement will hit the financial wires at exactly 8 on Friday night. I will have the legal team prepare the aggressive takeover documents immediately. I ended the call and placed the secure smartphone face down on my desk. For a brief moment, my quiet basement apartment felt completely serene. The heavy silence was a stark contrast to the absolute financial devastation I had just set into motion. But the peace did not last long. My personal cell phone resting on the worn kitchen counter began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then erupted into a continuous, relentless vibration. I walked over and picked it up. My screen was an absolute waterfall of notifications. They were not text messages from my family. They were social media alerts pouring in by the hundreds every single second. I opened the application and immediately saw the source of the chaos. Kelsey had gone on the offensive. She had posted a highly produced video to her main feed. She was sitting on the floor of her massive custom walk-in closet wearing a simple oversized sweater designed to make her look incredibly small and fragile. The lighting was perfectly calibrated to catch the tears brimming in her wide eyes. Her makeup was expertly smudged to convey emotional distress without actually ruining her flawless aesthetic. I have never spoken about my private family struggles online. Kelsey began, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed heartbreak. But today, I have to speak my truth. My older sister Riley is trying to destroy my family. She is mentally unstable and completely broke. She recently suffered a terrible accident, and instead of accepting our help, she is using it to extort us. She is demanding money and threatening to ruin my husband's new business if we do not pay her. I am terrified of what she might do next. Please send prayers for our family. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Kelsey had nearly 500,000 followers. I knew for a fact that Jamal had purchased at least 400,000 of those followers from overseas bot farms just to boost her vanity metrics. But the remaining real followers were a rabid, loyal audience who hung on her every word. They were already mobilizing. I scrolled down to the comments section. The top 2 comments were pinned for maximum visibility. They were from my parents. Thomas had written a formal declarative statement. "We love you, Kelsey. We are doing everything in our power to get your sister the psychiatric help she desperately needs right now. We will not negotiate with extortion." Brenda had followed up with her usual toxic maternal branding. "You are so brave for speaking out, my darling girl. You have always been the rock of this family. We stand with you completely." The validation from my parents acted like throwing gasoline on a fire. My direct messages were completely flooded with hate from absolute strangers. My inbox was packed with vile insults and aggressive threats. People were calling me a jealous monster, a gold digger, a toxic psycho, and a pathetic loser trying to steal from her hardworking sister. They told me to get a real job. They told me I deserved to be cut off. My secure corporate phone rang, cutting through the barrage of social media alerts. It was Sarah, my brilliant, aggressive head of public relations at Aegis Systems. "Boss Sarah," said, her voice tight with urgent professional concern. "We are tracking a highly defamatory video gaining massive traction across social platforms. The subject is your sister, and she is making direct allegations of extortion. I have the legal department drafting a comprehensive cease and desist order right now. Our engineering division is standing by. We can deploy our proprietary algorithms to bury the engagement metrics, shadow ban her account, and completely scrub this video from all trending feeds within 10 minutes. Give me the word, and I will nuke it from the internet." I looked at the paused video of my sister fake crying in her designer closet. I looked at the comments from my parents eagerly branding me as insane to protect their golden child. "Do absolutely nothing, Sarah." I commanded, my voice perfectly level. Sarah paused, clearly caught off guard. "Boss, this is coordinated defamation. It is a direct attack on your character. If we let this spread, it could impact your public image when we finally reveal your position at the company." "That is exactly why we are leaving it up," I explained, pacing the short length of my living room. For my entire life, my parents have painted Kelsey as the flawless golden child, while branding me as the unstable family scapegoat. Whenever Kelsey threw a tantrum, stole my ideas, or ruined my opportunities, my parents forced me to stay silent to keep the peace. I swallowed their abuse for 30 years because I thought fighting back made me the bad guy. I thought if I just worked hard and stayed quiet, they would eventually respect me. I stopped pacing and stared at the dark screen of my laptop. "I am not staying silent anymore, Sarah. If we scrub that video right now, Kelsey gets to play the victim of corporate censorship. She gets to claim she is being silenced. But if we leave it up and let it gather millions of views, it becomes a permanent public record. It becomes digital evidence of their perjury and malicious defamation. Let her dig the hole as deep as she possibly can. When the truth drops on Friday, that video is going to absolutely destroy her. Understood, Boss Sarah said, her tone shifting from concern to deep professional respect. We will monitor the engagement, but we will not intervene. We let them dig. I ended the call just as a sharp, heavy knock echoed against my apartment door. I checked the security feed. A courier in a crisp uniform was standing in the hallway holding a heavy clipboard. I opened the door and signed for the delivery. The courier handed me a thick, rigid envelope and walked away. I closed the door and turned the envelope over in my hands. It was crafted from heavy cream-colored cardstock. My name was written across the front in sweeping, elegant calligraphy. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the contents. It was an invitation bordered in thick, gleaming gold foil. Thomas and Brenda Wilson cordially invite you to a gala celebration. I read the flowing text and felt a sharp, cold smile pull at the corners of my mouth. They were hosting a massive, lavish event at their exclusive country club. It was a dual celebration marking Jamal's 32nd birthday and serving as the official launch party for his new hedge fund. The date printed at the bottom of the invitation was this upcoming Friday night. The event started at 7. It was a highly calculated strategic move by Thomas. He was using his country club status to legitimize Jamal. The guest list would be packed with high net worth investors, local politicians, and wealthy venture capitalists. Thomas was throwing a party to secure millions in capital for his golden son-in-law. They had mailed this extravagant invitation to my decoy apartment as a deliberate taunting insult. They fully expected me to be too broke, too humiliated, and too terrified by Kelsey's smear campaign to ever show my face. They wanted me to sit alone in my basement and cry while they celebrated their fake success. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a heavy black pen. I stared at the elegant RSVP card resting on the cheap laminate surface. The Aegis Systems acquisition of Vanguard Freight was scheduled to hit the financial wires at exactly 8 on Friday night. I would be standing right in the middle of Jamal's massive launch party when his entire financial world collapsed. I uncapped the pen and placed a sharp, bold checkmark in the box labeled Yes. The heavy cardstock of the RSVP card was still resting on my kitchen counter when I received the encrypted message from Marcus. The lead detective had agreed to meet us off-site to discuss the mounting evidence against my family. 30 minutes later, I was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany conference table in the secure underground executive suite of Aegis Systems. My elite corporate legal team flanked me on both sides, projecting an aura of absolute authority. Detective Miller sat across from us, looking completely out of his element in the high-tech billionaire bunker. I slid a sleek silver flash drive across the polished wood. The detective caught it and plugged it into his secure laptop. That is the complete, unedited dashcam footage from Jamal's SUV, I stated calmly, watching the detective eyes widen as the raw video began to play. My security team extracted it directly from the vehicle cloud backup, before Jamal even realized it was syncing. You will also find the exact GPS telemetry logs, proving he intentionally drove into the remote canyon and purposely disabled the vehicle heating system. Detective Miller clicked through the files, his expression hardening with every piece of digital evidence he reviewed. But the most damning item was the extracted text log. I nodded to my lead counsel, who handed over a printed transcript. Kelsey sent those messages to Jamal while I was actively suffocating in the back seat, I explained, pointing to the highlighted timestamps on the paper. She explicitly acknowledges that my lips were turning blue. She admits I was begging for my inhaler. She told Jamal to keep driving because they needed to teach me a harsh lesson about family loyalty. Detective Miller read the transcripts and closed his laptop with a sharp, definitive snap. This elevates the situation entirely, Miss Wilson. We are no longer looking at simple, reckless endangerment. This shows clear premeditation and a chilling disregard for human life. I am taking this directly to the district attorney right now. I will have an expedited felony arrest warrant signed by a judge before the end of the day. As the detective left the conference room to secure the warrant, my lead corporate attorney pulled a separate, heavily redacted file from her leather briefcase. She spread the financial documents out in front of me. We had been digging deeply into the exact structure of Jamal's new hedge fund, and the results were absolutely staggering. We followed the money trail, Riley, my attorney said, tapping a complex flowchart with her pen. Jamal is dangerously over-leveraged on his Vanguard freight short position. But the critical detail is his primary lender. He secured his massive margin loans through Apex Horizon Bank. He used your father's entire real estate portfolio and your parents' primary estate as the collateral. I stared at the bank logo printed on the loan documents. A cold thrill of realization washed over me. Aegis Systems executed a quiet, hostile takeover of Apex Horizon Bank last quarter, I murmured, tracing the logo with my index finger. We are the majority shareholders. Exactly, my attorney replied, a sharp, predatory smile matching my own. When Jamal's short position implodes tonight, his margin will be called immediately. Because his fund lacks the liquid capital to cover the astronomical losses, he will default instantly. When he defaults, the bank seizes the collateral. And since Aegis Systems owns the bank, you effectively own Jamal's debt. You will legally possess the deed to your parents' mansion, their retirement accounts, and every single asset Jamal claims to hold. They had unknowingly handed me the keys to their entire kingdom. For years, they had flaunted their wealth, treating me like a pathetic peasant who was lucky to receive their discarded scraps. Now they were entirely at my mercy. Friday arrived with a heavy electric anticipation hanging in the air. At exactly 6 in the evening, my chief financial officer, David, stepped into my private executive dressing room. The room was buzzing with my styling team, but David ignored the chaos. He carried a leather binder containing the final legal documents for the Vanguard freight acquisition. The board has given unanimous approval, Riley David said, presenting the paperwork. Vanguard Freight has accepted our premium offer. The ink just needs your signature. If we push this acquisition through tonight, the financial impact will be immediate and catastrophic. Anyone shorting Vanguard will be financially liquidated. Within minutes, it will be an absolute bloodbath on the trading floor. I took the solid gold fountain pen from his hand. I did not hesitate for a single second. I signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes, legally authorizing the multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Make the public announcement at exactly 8 tonight, I instructed, handing the binder back to David. Lock down the trading algorithms and initiate the corporate press release. I want the entire financial world to know exactly who bought Vanguard Freight. David nodded solemnly, stepping out of the room to execute the final phase of the operation. I turned back to the floor-to-ceiling mirror. My styling team stepped away, revealing the final result. I was no longer the exhausted, freezing girl shivering in the back of a luxury SUV. I was not the pathetic, broke sister they loved to humiliate. I was stepping into a custom-tailored midnight blue couture gown that draped perfectly across my figure. The fabric shimmered like dark water, catching the light with every subtle movement. I slid a pair of diamond teardrop earrings into place, letting them frame my face. My makeup was sharp, flawless, and commanding. I looked exactly like the billionaire chief executive officer I truly was. I checked my diamond-studded watch. It was time to go. Thomas and Brenda thought they were hosting a lavish celebration of their golden son-in-law. They thought tonight was the crowning achievement of their fake, manufactured lives. I grabbed my clutch and walked toward the waiting armored motorcade. They were throwing a party, but I was dressed for a funeral. It was time to bury their egos once and for all. The heavy oak doors of the Denver Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom swung open, revealing a blinding sea of crystal chandeliers and tailored tuxedos. I stepped over the threshold, letting the heavy midnight blue silk of my gown trail perfectly behind me. The room was practically vibrating with the clinking of champagne flutes and the arrogant laughter of the city elite. Thomas had truly spared no expense to manufacture the illusion of Jamal's absolute triumph. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of beluga caviar, while a string quartet played softly from a raised velvet platform. It was a masterpiece of financial theater designed entirely to separate wealthy investors from their money. I barely had time to register the ice sculptures flanking the main bar before a sharp manicured hand clamped down on my bicep like a vice. "What in the world are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, dragging me forcefully behind a towering floral arrangement. My mother face was pulled tight with panic and rage beneath her heavy layers of expensive foundation. She wore a diamond necklace that I knew for a fact Thomas had leveraged a second mortgage to afford. Her eyes darted around the room, frantically terrified that someone might have noticed my arrival. "You actually came to beg for a handout in front of all these people?" Brenda spat, tightening her grip on my arm. "You have absolutely no shame, Riley. Your sister is practically having a nervous breakdown because of your extortion attempts, and you have the audacity to show up at her husband's celebration. You listen to me very carefully. You will stay right here, in this corner. You will not speak to a single one of Jamal investors. He is the only true success in this family, and I will not let your pathetic jealousy ruin his launch." I looked down at her hand digging into my arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I just stared at her with a calm, dead, and icy silence that made her momentarily falter. I gently pried her fingers off my silk sleeve one by one. "I am not here to beg, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am just here for the show." Before she could unleash another venomous threat, a booming voice echoed from the adjacent walkway. "Brenda, darling, is that you?" My mother posture changed instantly. The malicious sneer vanished, replaced by a radiant, practiced smile of pure high society charm. She spun around to face State Senator Robert Vance, a man known for his deep political pockets and wide influence in the regional tech sector. Senator Vance. Brenda gushed, extending both hands. "We are so incredibly honored you could make it tonight." I stepped forward naturally, but Brenda instantly shifted her weight, using her shoulder and hip to physically block me from the senator view. It was a subtle, aggressive maneuver she had perfected over decades. Whenever we attended country club dinners, charity galas, or high society functions, she would seamlessly position herself to cut me out of the circle. I was the ghost of the family. I was the ugly secret they hid in the background while they paraded Kelsey around like a prize-winning thoroughbred. "You must come meet the stars of the hour," Brenda continued, completely ignoring my existence as she hooked her arm through the senator's elbow. "My son-in-law Jamal is just brilliant. His new fund is going to revolutionize the logistics market. And my daughter Kelsey has been his absolute rock through all of it. They are standing right over by the ice sculpture. You absolutely must hear Jamal pitch." She led the senator away without casting a single backward glance in my direction. I watched them walk toward the center of the ballroom where Jamal was holding court. He was surrounded by a tight circle of wealthy venture capitalists and older men in expensive suits. Kelsey stood dutifully at his side, wearing a sparkling silver dress, clutching a champagne flute, and looking adoringly at her husband. I moved silently out from behind the floral arrangement and glided toward the edge of their circle, maintaining enough distance to remain unnoticed while keeping them clearly within earshot. Jamal was sweating slightly, but his voice was loud and brimming with toxic arrogance. "The play is foolproof, gentlemen," Jamal bragged, gesturing broadly with his drink. "Vanguard Freight is a sinking ship. They are bleeding capital and their management is completely incompetent. My fund has taken a massive, aggressive short position against them. We are heavily leveraged, but the payout will be astronomical. By Monday morning, they will be filing for bankruptcy, and we will be collecting a 9-figure return. It is essentially free money." The older investors chuckled and nodded, sipping their drinks. They were completely blinded by his charismatic confidence. They had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. They did not know his margin loans were secured by his father-in-law mortgaged properties. They did not know he was gambling with fake chips. I caught Kelsey's eye through the crowd. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw me standing there in my midnight blue couture. I did not look broke. I did not look crazy. I looked like a predator watching its prey wander into a cage. She quickly looked away, leaning closer to Jamal and whispering urgently in his ear, I turned my back on their pathetic charade and walked gracefully toward the main bar. A bartender in a white jacket immediately stepped forward. "Sparkling water, please, with a twist of lime," I requested. I took the crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cool liquid grounded me. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel the sting of my mother rejection or the lifetime of being erased. I only felt the cold, absolute certainty of the mathematics. I raised my left wrist and glanced at my diamond-studded watch. The second hand swept silently across the dark face. It was 7:55 p.m., 5 minutes to detonation. The sharp ringing of crystal echoed across the grand ballroom, cutting through the low murmur of wealthy socialites and the soft melodies of the string quartet. I kept my eyes fixed on the center of the room. Jamal was standing on the raised velvet platform, tapping a silver spoon against a champagne flute. He handed the spoon to a passing waiter and adjusted the lapels of his custom tuxedo. He oozed a manufactured magnetic charisma that practically infected the air around him. The room fell completely silent. All eyes turned toward the man of the hour. "Welcome, everyone," Jamal began, his voice smooth and amplified by the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just my 32nd birthday, but the official launch of Apex Horizon Capital." The crowd broke into polite, enthusiastic applause. Kelsey stood at the front of the stage, gazing up at him with wide, adoring eyes. She was wearing a gown that cost more than my previous annual salary. Brenda was practically vibrating with pride beside her. My mother looked around the room, soaking in the envy of her peers, as if she had achieved this success herself. "We are standing at the edge of a new financial frontier," Jamal continued, pacing the stage with practiced ease. "When I started this fund, I told my investors that I would not settle for average market returns. I promised aggressive strategy. I promised unparalleled market instincts. I promised that we would find the weak links in the corporate chain and exploit them for massive gains." He paused, letting his words soak into the minds of the greedy venture capitalists and banking executives, filling the room. These were men and women who ruined lives for fractions of a percent. They worshipped profit above all else. "I owe a massive debt of gratitude to the man who made the initial seed funding possible," Jamal said, extending a hand toward my father. "Thomas Wilson is a visionary. He recognized my talent when others hesitated." Thomas stepped forward, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. He raised his glass high above his head, his booming voice easily carrying across the massive ballroom. "I did more than recognize your talent, son," Thomas shouted, drawing appreciative chuckles from the crowd. "I put my money exactly where my mouth is. I mortgaged the family estate for this fund. I leveraged my entire commercial real estate portfolio. I staked this family entire net worth on your genius because I know a guaranteed winner when I see one." More applause erupted. Men in expensive suits clapped Thomas on the back, congratulating him on his bold, aggressive business acumen. They thought he was a titan of industry making a brilliant, ruthless play. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water. Thomas had just publicly confessed to signing his own financial death warrant. He had handed the executioner a loaded gun and bragged about it to the entire city. My father had always loved the sound of his own voice, but tonight it was the sound of his own ruin. Jamal held up a hand to quiet the cheering crowd. His chest puffed out even further, fueled by the blind adoration of the elite. "Thomas is right to be confident," Jamal boasted, leaning into the microphone, "because I am thrilled to announce to my investors tonight that our flagship play is already a monumental success. We took a massive leveraged short position against Vanguard Freight. The company is bleeding out, and their management is completely blind to the reality of their situation. I have aggressively bet against them, and the market is already responding exactly as I predicted." A murmur of excited greed rippled through the crowd. Men leaned in closer, hanging on his every word. They could practically taste the money. "By the opening bell on Monday morning, Vanguard Freight will be in a complete freefall," Jamal declared, his voice rising with theatrical triumph. "And my investors will secure a guaranteed 30% return on their capital. We are going to crush the market." The ballroom erupted into a roar of approval. Kelsey clapped her hands together, her diamond rings flashing under the chandeliers. Brenda wiped a fake tear of joy from her eye. They were standing at the absolute pinnacle of their false reality. They felt invincible. They believed they were the royalty of Denver, untouchable and superior to everyone beneath them. Jamal let the applause wash over him. He scanned the room, soaking in the power and the praise. Then his eyes drifted past the wealthy bankers and the smiling politicians. His gaze cut straight through the crowd and locked directly onto me, standing quietly at the back bar. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the most powerful people in the city. He wanted to break me down and remind me of my place at the absolute bottom of their hierarchy. He wanted to make sure I knew that my presence here was only tolerated so they could mock my failures. He leaned intimately into the microphone, his eyes still burning into mine. "You see, the financial world is just like nature," Jamal said, his tone turning dark and mocking. "There is a natural order to things. Some people are born to lead. Some people have the vision and the drive to conquer the market. In this world, there are the apex predators, and then there are the bottom feeders, the weak, pathetic failures who just do not have the intellect to survive. They drag everyone else down with their toxic incompetence. Tonight we celebrate the predators." He raised his glass directly at me, a silent, vicious salute. "To victory," Jamal toasted. "To victory," the crowd echoed, raising their champagne flutes in unison. I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I just stared back at him with a gaze so cold and hollow, it made his smug smile falter for a fraction of a second. He thought he was the apex predator. He thought he had won. He had absolutely no idea that he was a microscopic insect swimming directly into the jaws of a leviathan. I lowered my glass to the marble bar top. I looked down at my diamond watch. The second hand ticked past the 12. It was exactly 8 p.m. The transition was instantaneous. It started as a low, synchronized hum at the front of the room near the stage. Then it spread. It swept across the grand ballroom like a massive, invisible shockwave. Across the room, the cell phones of every single investor, banker, and broker began to buzz simultaneously. The symphony of vibrating devices created a low, terrifying mechanical hum that entirely drowned out the soft melodies of the string quartet. It was not a scattered ringing. It was a perfectly synchronized alarm of financial catastrophe, hitting every tailored pocket and designer purse in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom at the exact same second. Men in custom tuxedos abruptly stopped laughing. Women in couture gowns paused mid-sip. The collective energy in the room violently shifted from arrogant high society triumph to sudden electric confusion. An older venture capitalist in the front row, right at the edge of the velvet stage, pulled his phone from his breast pocket. His face drained of color so fast he looked as though he had suffered a sudden stroke. He stared at the glowing screen, his jaw working silently, before he finally found his voice. "Vanguard Freight just got acquired," the investor shouted, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "The stock is up 400% in after-hours trading. It is a massive cash buyout." The words hit the crowded ballroom like a physical shockwave. A chorus of gasps and vicious curses erupted as dozens of other screens confirmed the impossible news. "Up 400%, another broker yelled, shoving his way toward the stage, his face red with rage. "They are gapping up to numbers I have never even seen. The short sellers are getting absolutely slaughtered." On the stage, Jamal stood completely paralyzed. The microphone slipped from his trembling hand and hit the wooden floor with a loud, piercing feedback screech that made half the room cover their ears. He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out his secure smartphone. His thumb shook violently as he opened his primary trading application. I watched him from across the room, nursing my sparkling water. I could see the exact moment his soul left his body. The soft blue light of the screen illuminated his face, turning his skin a sickly ashen gray. His dashboard was no longer displaying the brilliant green numbers of his guaranteed victory. It was a violent, terrifying sea of deep, bleeding red. When a hedge fund shorts a stock, they borrow shares to sell them, hoping the price drops so they can buy them back for pennies. It is a gamble that relies entirely on a company failing. But when a massive corporate entity swoops in and buys that failing company at a massive premium, paying entirely in cash, the stock price instantly skyrockets. The short sellers are legally obligated to buy those shares back at the new astronomically high price to cover their borrowed positions. Because there is no ceiling to how high a stock can go, the potential losses are mathematically infinite. Jamal had leveraged his entire fund against Vanguard Freight. He had borrowed millions of shares confident in his own arrogant predictions. Now the automated margin calls were hitting his accounts with ruthless mechanical efficiency. The banking algorithms did not care about his charisma or his custom tuxedo. They only cared about the debt. In less than 60 seconds, Jamal's entire multi-million-dollar hedge fund was completely wiped out. He was mathematically liquidated, worse than zero. He owed hundreds of millions of dollars he simply did not have. Chaos instantly consumed the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The wealthy investors who had just been cheering his name were now screaming at him, demanding to know how exposed their personal portfolios were. The polite high society veneer dissolved into a rabid panic of rich men realizing their money was burning to ash in real time. At the front of the stage, Thomas was staring at his own phone. His chest was heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. The realization of what this meant slammed into him with the force of a runaway freight train. He had not just invested spare cash into this venture. He had signed over the deeds to his commercial real estate empire. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on his sprawling mansion. He had handed over his retirement accounts as collateral to Apex Horizon Bank to secure Jamal margin loans. Because Jamal had just defaulted, the bank would instantly seize everything Thomas owned. Jamal Thomas roared, his voice tearing through the panicked shouting of the crowd. He scrambled up the steps of the velvet stage, his face purple with rage and absolute terror. Jamal, what is happening? You said this was a guaranteed play. You said Vanguard was dead. My houses are tied to your margin. The bank holds my collateral. Do something. Thomas lunged forward and grabbed Jamal forcefully by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, shaking him. He was a desperate, terrified man watching his entire life work evaporate into thin air. Fix it! Thomas screamed, spit flying from his lips. Fix it right now! The mask of the charming, sophisticated son-in-law instantly shattered. Jamal's true ruthless colors bled through. He was a cornered predator facing absolute ruin, and he lashed out with violent, unfiltered aggression. Get your hands off me, old man, Jamal snarled. He shoved Thomas backward with vicious force. The violent push sent my father stumbling across the stage. Thomas lost his footing and crashed hard into the podium, knocking the heavy wooden structure to the floor with a loud, splintering crack. Kelsey shrieked in horror, rushing forward to kneel beside her fallen father. Dad, she cried, grabbing his arm before looking up at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. Jamal, are you crazy? He just gave you everything. Jamal did not even look down at them. He stepped over the broken microphone stand, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he dialed his broker. He paced the edge of the stage, his eyes wide and frantic like a trapped animal. The wealthy investors had backed away, giving him a wide berth, treating him like a contagious disease. Answer the phone, Jamal screamed into his device, completely oblivious to the hundreds of people watching his absolute psychological collapse. Answer it. What do you mean my accounts are locked? Who executed this buyout? He paused, listening to the frantic voice of his broker on the other end of the line. The blood vessels in his neck bulged against his white collar. I do not care about the margin calls, Jamal roared, kicking a tall floral arrangement off the stage, causing glass and water to shatter across the dance floor. Tell me who the hell bought Vanguard Freight? Who has enough liquid capital to trigger a squeeze like this on a Friday night? Give me a name. I stood silently by the bar, watching the total destruction of their empire unfold exactly as I had mathematically modeled it. I placed my empty crystal glass on the cold marble counter. Suddenly, the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed. The massive projector screen hanging behind the stage, which had spent the entire evening proudly displaying the gold and black logo of Apex Horizon Capital, flickered briefly. The speakers crackled to life, cutting through the shouting and the chaos. The giant screen switched instantly from Jamal Vanity logo to a live high-definition breaking news broadcast from the leading global financial network. The crisp, authoritative voice of the lead financial anchor echoed across the vaulted ceilings of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Her face was perfectly framed against a backdrop of scrolling green market tickers. "We have a massive breaking story hitting the wire right now," the anchor announced, her tone urgent and electrified. In a completely unprecedented Friday evening move, the embattled logistics giant Vanguard Freight has just been acquired in a hostile all-cash buyout. The premium paid is staggering, pushing Vanguard stock up over 400% in after-hours trading and absolutely decimating anyone holding a short position. A collective gasp rippled through the frozen crowd of elite investors. Jamal stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the shattered podium to keep from collapsing. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. But the acquisition itself is only half the story, the anchor continued, looking directly into the camera. The purchasing entity is Aegis Systems, the notoriously secretive defense and technology conglomerate. For the past 6 years, the identity of the Aegis founder and chief executive officer has been the most fiercely guarded secret in Silicon Valley. Tonight, that veil of secrecy has finally been lifted. The elusive billionaire has officially stepped out of the shadows to take public control of her empire. The live video feed of the anchor abruptly shrank to the corner of the massive projector screen. In its place, a breathtaking high-resolution corporate portrait materialized. It was a crisp, brilliant image of a woman sitting at the head of a sleek obsidian boardroom table. She wore a sharp, tailored midnight blue suit. Her gaze was piercing, commanding, and utterly ruthless. It was my face. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute and suffocating. It was not just quiet. It was the total vacuum of sound that precedes a massive explosion. Brenda dropped her crystal champagne flute. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp crash echoed through the dead quiet room, but she did not even flinch. She just stared up at the massive glowing projection of my face, her jaw trembling uncontrollably. The anchor voice continued to narrate the broadcast, filling the silence with the exact history my family had spent years mocking. According to the press release issued just moments ago, the founder of Aegis Systems is Riley Wilson, the anchor reported. Wilson built the tech monopoly entirely from scratch after dropping out of college at 19. While her family and former peers believed she had failed, Wilson was quietly engineering proprietary predictive algorithms that would eventually revolutionize global supply chains and digital security. Operating completely anonymously through a network of shell companies and legal proxies, she turned a tiny dorm room software project into a $100 billion global powerhouse. By maintaining total anonymity, she successfully executed dozens of quiet acquisitions, including the recent stealth takeover of Apex Horizon Bank. Thomas let out a choked, strangled noise. He turned his head slowly, looking at Jamal, who was now hyperventilating on the stage. Apex Horizon Bank was the exact institution holding the margin loans for Jamal-ruined hedge fund. It was the bank holding the deeds to Thomas' entire real estate portfolio. My father realized in that exact terrifying second that I did not just defeat his golden son-in-law. I legally owned both of them. She did not just build a company. The anchor emphasized, her voice echoing through the ballroom speakers. Riley Wilson built an inescapable financial ecosystem. Financial analysts are already calling this Vanguard Freight acquisition the most ruthless and perfectly timed market trap in modern history. Anyone betting against Vanguard today has effectively handed their entire net worth directly to Aegis Systems. Kelsey clamped both hands over her mouth, shaking her head violently in denial. She looked up at my 20-foot-tall portrait on the screen, and then her eyes began to dart frantically around the ballroom. She was searching for the pathetic broke sister she had spent her entire life humiliating. She was looking for the girl she had intentionally left to freeze in the back of a luxury SUV just to teach a cruel lesson about family hierarchy. Kelsey found me standing at the back bar. I had not moved a single inch. I was bathed in the soft ambient light of the crystal chandeliers, wearing the exact same midnight blue couture gown featured in the corporate portrait, currently dominating the room. My posture was relaxed, but my eyes were locked onto my sister, with the cold, dead precision of a sniper. Kelsey let out a sharp, terrified whimper. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger in my direction. One by one, the wealthy venture capitalists, the arrogant banking executives, and the elite socialites followed her trembling finger. Every single head in the massive ballroom turned away from the giant projector screen and locked onto the woman standing quietly in the shadows at the back of the room. The wealthy investors parted like the Red Sea, stepping back to create a wide, unobstructed path between me and the stage. The arrogant laughter from earlier was entirely gone. The room was paralyzed by a mixture of absolute awe and primal fear. They were looking at a ghost who had just revealed herself as a god. My mother Brenda stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. Her heavy diamond necklace suddenly looked like a cheap plastic prop. She opened her mouth to speak, to say my name, to try and claim some pathetic maternal connection to the billionaire staring her down. But her throat worked uselessly, and she shrank back into the crowd, terrified of the monster she had unknowingly created. I looked down at the glass of sparkling water resting on the polished marble bar. I reached out and calmly set the glass down, ensuring the base made a sharp, definitive clink against the stone. I smoothed the silk fabric of my gown. I lifted my chin, and I began to walk down the center aisle toward the stage. The sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns parted before me like a receding tide. The only sound in the cavernous Ritz-Carlton ballroom was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor. The city elite, who had just spent the last hour treating me like an invisible peasant, were now staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my gaze locked entirely on the velvet stage. I climbed the 3 short steps onto the platform. Jamal was still frozen in place, his skin slick with a cold, panicked sweat. His chest heaved erratically as his eyes darted from the massive projector screen, broadcasting my face down to the bleeding red numbers on his smartphone. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his financial destruction. I stepped directly into his personal space. I did not say a single word to him. I simply reached out and pulled the microphone from his limp, unresisting fingers. Before I could even raise it to my lips, a shrill, desperate scream pierced the heavy silence of the room. "This is a prank!" Kelsey shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. She lunged forward, her silver dress catching the stage lights as she scrambled up the steps. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Turn off that screen right now. She is a nobody. She does not own Aegis Systems. She is just my pathetic, broke sister trying to ruin our night. Jamal, do something. Tell them this is a lie." Kelsey grabbed her husband by the arm, shaking him violently, but Jamal could not speak. He was actively hyperventilating, staring blankly at the floor as his entire world collapsed around him. The margin calls were already executing, liquidating everything he claimed to own. He was a hollow, empty shell of the arrogant predator who had been holding court just 5 minutes earlier. I ignored Kelsey, frantic screaming. I simply raised my left hand and gave a sharp, decisive signal toward the massive oak doors at the back of the ballroom. On my command, the doors swung open with a heavy thud. My chief financial officer, David, stepped into the room. He was flanked by a dozen members of my elite corporate security team, dressed in immaculate black suits. Behind them marched a team of heavy-hitting corporate attorneys carrying thick leather binders filled with irrefutable legal documents. The security detail moved with military precision, forming a protective perimeter around the base of the stage, while David and my lead counsel walked directly up the center aisle. The wealthy investors shrank back against the walls, completely intimidated by the show of absolute corporate power. Kelsey stopped screaming. She stumbled backward, her hands covering her mouth, as David stepped onto the stage and handed me the microphone stand. I locked the microphone into place and looked out over the sea of pale, terrified faces. 5 minutes ago, the man standing shivering behind me gave a very passionate speech about the natural order of the financial world, I began my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. He stood on this stage and arrogantly divided the world into apex predators and bottom feeders. He told you that the weak do not have the intellect to survive. I find that incredibly ironic, because for the last 7 years, my family has proudly called me that exact same thing. I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with my mother. Brenda was gripping the edge of a cocktail table, her knuckles entirely white. For years, my parents and my sister treated me like an embarrassment. I continued making sure every word echoed through the silent ballroom. They called me a failure. They mocked my ambitions. They left me out in the cold, both figuratively and literally, because I did not fit their shallow, manufactured image of high society success. They paraded Jamal around as their golden boy, their financial genius, while treating me like a peasant who should be grateful for their table scraps. I swept my gaze across the venture capitalists and banking executives who had been cheering for Jamal just moments before. But while they were busy spending money, they did not actually have on designer clothes and country club memberships. I was working. While they were busy mocking me, I was quietly building Aegis systems from a dorm room software project into a $100 billion global conglomerate. I was writing the exact predictive algorithms that currently process your banking transactions. I was building the digital infrastructure that your entire financial world relies on to function. I did not need to brag at cocktail parties because I was too busy buying the banks that hold your mortgages. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear the subtle hum of the crystal chandeliers. Several of the older investors actually looked down at the floor, completely humiliated that they had been duped by a charismatic fraud, while the real power in the room had been standing silently at the bar. David stepped forward and handed me the first thick leather binder. It was heavy, filled with the exact financial documentation we had extracted during the Apex Horizon Bank takeover. I flipped it open to the flagged page. The ink on the contracts was stark and undeniable. I turned my back on the crowd and faced my parents. Thomas was standing at the edge of the stage, his face a mask of absolute terror. He knew exactly what was in that binder. He had signed the papers himself. "Mom, Dad?" I said, my voice dropping to a conversational but razor-sharp tone. "Earlier tonight, you loudly bragged to Senator Vance and everyone else in this room that you mortgaged your family estate to back Jamal Hedge Fund. You leveraged your entire real estate portfolio and your retirement accounts to fund his massive short position against Vanguard Freight. You staked your entire net worth on his supposed genius." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the stage, staring directly down into my father's eyes. "Do you know who issued that loan?" Thomas just stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His arrogant swagger had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified old man. "Apex Capital," I said, letting the name hang in the dead electric air of the ballroom. "You secured Jamal massive margin loans through Apex Capital. You staked your mansion, your commercial properties, and your entire retirement portfolio on his success. What your brilliant son-in-law failed to research, and what you failed to verify, is that Apex Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of Aegis Systems. I acquired them in a quiet corporate buyout last October." I took a step closer, my heels echoing sharply against the wood. Jamal just lost everything. His short position imploded the second I bought Vanguard Freight. The algorithms have already executed the margin calls. Because his fund lacks the liquid capital to cover a loss of this magnitude, he has instantly defaulted. And when a borrower defaults, the bank seizes the collateral. I looked at Brenda, whose face was rapidly draining of all color. "You do not owe the bank anymore. You owe me. I own your estate. I own your properties. I own the very ground you are standing on." Thomas let out a ragged, wheezing gasp. His hands flew to his chest, his fingers clutching the expensive fabric of his tuxedo jacket. His knees buckled entirely. He collapsed backward, hitting a velvet dining chair with a heavy thud. His eyes were wide and unfocused as the reality of absolute financial annihilation crushed the breath out of his lungs. Brenda let out a piercing guttural sob. The high society matriarch who had just spent the evening parading her wealth and mocking my existence was now physically trembling. Tears ruined her flawless, expensive makeup, cutting dark mascara tracks down her pale cheeks. She looked down at the glittering diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, suddenly realizing it was no longer a symbol of her elite status, but a chain of insurmountable debt. They were utterly destitute. In a matter of 60 seconds, they had plummeted from the apex of Denver high society to absolute bankruptcy. The wealthy investors surrounding the stage began whispering frantically, stepping even further back, treating my parents like a toxic contagion. Nobody was rushing forward to help Thomas. Nobody was offering Brenda a handkerchief. In their ruthless financial world, weakness was a disease, and my family had just become terminal. Jamal fell to his knees. The sharp impact of his kneecaps hitting the wooden stage echoed through the microphone still lying on the floor. His custom tuxedo pants tore, but he did not care. The charismatic apex predator was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, sobbing coward. "Riley, please," Jamal begged, his voice cracking hysterically. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, reaching out toward the hem of my midnight blue gown. "Riley, you cannot do this. We can fix this. I can restructure the fund. I can work for you. We are family. You cannot destroy your own family." I looked down at his shaking, outstretched hands and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, just cold, calculating justice. "Family," I repeated, tasting the bitter irony of the word. "You want to talk to me about family, Jamal?" I signaled to my lead counsel, who stepped forward and handed me a thick, sealed medical file. I dropped it on the stage right in front of Jamal, trembling hands. Family does not intentionally disable the heating system in a luxury SUV and leave their sister-in-law to die in a remote canyon during a Category 5 blizzard, I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent ballroom. Family does not sit in a warm, comfortable mansion laughing while someone's lips turn blue. And when I finally crawled out of that frozen canyon and collapsed in the emergency room, family does not deliberately freeze my health savings accounts and cancel my credit cards while I am lying unconscious in the intensive care unit. Kelsey let out a sharp cry, covering her face with her hands, but I refused to let her look away. "You thought you were teaching me a harsh lesson about loyalty," I told them, my gaze sweeping over Jamal, Kelsey, and my weeping mother. "You thought you could leave me for dead and simply inherit whatever scraps I left behind. You treated my life like a disposable asset. You did not just fail me as a family, you actively tried to erase me. Now you are experiencing the exact same erasure, only I am doing it entirely within the boundaries of the law." Jamal grabbed his hair, pulling at the roots as he sobbed into the polished floorboards. "Please," he wailed, his forehead resting against the wood. "I will do anything. I have a wife. I have a reputation. You are taking my entire life." "I am only taking what you legally handed me," I replied coldly. "You placed the bet, Jamal. You just did not realize you were betting against the house." I.e. Before Jamal could choke out another pathetic plea for mercy, a new sound violently shattered the tension in the room. It was not the soft murmurs of terrified socialites or the quiet rustle of my corporate legal team shifting their weight. It was the heavy, synchronized thud of tactical boots marching aggressively across the marble floor of the lobby. The massive oak doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a violent crash. The crowd parted instantly, scattering in absolute panic. It was not my corporate security detail stepping through the threshold. It was a dozen heavily armed officers from the Denver Police Department Financial Crimes Division. Their tactical vests caught the glare of the crystal chandeliers as they marched straight down the center aisle, their hands resting purposefully on their utility belts. They were not here to attend a party. They were here to make an arrest. The lead detective, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved from granite, did not even glance at the ruined hedge fund manager. He marched directly past Jamal, his heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the wooden stage. He stopped squarely in front of my sister. Kelsey blinked, her tear-streaked face twisting in sudden absolute confusion. She took a hesitant step backward, her silver couture gown catching on the microphone wire. "Kelsey, you are under arrest for felony reckless endangerment and evidence tampering," the detective announced. His voice was a flat mechanical baritone that cut effortlessly through the ambient panic of the ballroom. He reached to his utility belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No," Kelsey shrieked. The word ripped from her throat like a physical tearing of vocal cords. "No, you have the wrong person. It is him. It is Jamal. He lost the money. I did not do anything wrong." She thrashed wildly as the detective grabbed her wrist. The polished veneer of the high society princess instantly shattered into a million jagged pieces. She kicked out her expensive stiletto heel, snapping off against the floorboards as she fought against the unrelenting iron grip of the officer. "Mom, Dad, do something," Kelsey screamed hysterically. She twisted her neck, looking down at the front row where our parents were seated. "Make them stop. Tell them who we are." But Thomas and Brenda did not move. They were completely paralyzed, anchored to their chairs by the crushing, suffocating weight of their own absolute financial ruin. Thomas was staring blankly at his trembling hands, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He had just lost his mansion, his commercial empire, and his legacy in a matter of seconds. Brenda was openly sobbing, her face buried in her palms, rocking back and forth in a state of total catatonic shock. They could not save her. They could not even save themselves. "You have the right to remain silent," the detective continued, entirely unfazed by her violent thrashing as he locked the cold steel around her wrists. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. How could you do this to me?" Kelsey sobbed, glaring up at me with absolute unfiltered venom as the cuffs clicked shut. "You are a liar. You have no proof." I stepped forward, raising the microphone to my lips. "I do not need to lie, Kelsey," I said, my voice projecting clearly over her frantic weeping. "You drove a luxury SUV equipped with a state-of-the-art telematics system. It records GPS coordinates, engine diagnostics, and cabin audio. When you deliberately disabled the heating system and left me in that canyon, you thought you were being incredibly clever. You thought deleting the local dashcam footage erased your crime." I looked out at the silent, horrified crowd of investors and socialites, ensuring every single person in the room understood the exact depth of her depravity. The wealthy elite who had spent the evening admiring Kelsey were now staring at her with open, undeniable disgust. "But Aegis Systems specializes in digital forensics." I continued, my tone devoid of any mercy. "I pulled the encrypted cloud backups myself. I handed the Denver Police Department the exact GPS data mapping your route that night. You did not drive into town to find help. You did not call emergency services. While I was freezing in the snow, slipping into severe hypothermia, you and Jamal drove to the Alpine Lounge. The telematics recorded your exact parking time. My legal team even pulled the credit card receipts. You sat in a warm, upscale bar and ordered 2 dirty martinis while you waited for me to die." Kelsey's face drained of all color. The fight completely left her body. Her knees buckled, and the detective had to haul her upward by her upper arm to keep her from collapsing entirely onto the stage. She whimpered a pathetic, broken sound, realizing that the digital footprint she had arrogantly ignored was now an inescapable iron cage. While every eye in the ballroom was locked on Kelsey Public Destruction, Jamal saw his opening. The ultimate apex predator, the man who had just spent the evening lecturing the room on loyalty and ruthless survival, looked at his weeping, handcuffed wife and made a calculated decision. He abandoned her without a second thought. Moving with desperate, panicked stealth, Jamal slipped off the side of the stage. He kept his head down, using the chaotic, shifting crowd of horrified investors as a human shield. He shoved past a paralyzed waiter, knocking a silver tray of empty champagne flutes to the floor, but did not look back. His custom tuxedo jacket was torn, his tie was askew, and his face was slick with terrified sweat. He just needed to get out of the building. If he could reach his car, he could figure out an exit strategy. He could call his offshore contacts. He could run. He reached the grand foyer, pushing his way frantically toward the heavy oak exit doors at the back of the ballroom. Freedom was just inches away. He threw his weight against the brass handles, shoving the heavy doors outward to make his escape into the night. He slammed directly into a solid wall of human resistance. Standing in the doorway, blocking his only exit, were 2 tall, imposing men in dark suits. The bright fluorescent lights of the hallway illuminated the bold yellow lettering printed across the back of their navy blue windbreakers. FBI. Jamal stumbled backward, his breath catching violently in his throat. He looked left then right, but the corridor was completely sealed off by uniformed tactical agents. Jamal, the lead agent, said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion as he reached into his jacket and flashed a gold badge. "We need to talk about wire fraud and investor deception." 6 months later, the dust had finally settled over the smoldering ruins of their high society empire. The total magnitude of the destruction was a matter of public record, and it was absolute. Jamal did not just lose his hedge fund. Federal investigators tore through his financial history with ruthless mechanical efficiency, exposing years of fabricated returns, manipulated investor data, and blatant wire fraud. The Securities and Exchange Commission formally stripped him of every trading license he possessed. He was legally barred from ever touching the financial sector again. The wealthy venture capitalists, who had once eagerly shaken his hand and praised his genius, were now lining up to file massive class action lawsuits against his empty estate. He sat in a federal courtroom, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, listening to prosecutors detail his infinite greed. Facing 20 years in federal prison, Jamal did the only thing a true cornered predator knows how to do. He turned on his own. The ink on Kelsey's arrest warrant was barely dry before Jamal filed for divorce. He severed all legal ties to his wife in a pathetic, desperate attempt to distance himself from her criminal liability. It did not save him, but it certainly destroyed her. Kelsey's arrogant delusion shattered against the cold, hard reality of the state judicial system. Her high society privilege meant absolutely nothing to the judge presiding over her felony reckless endangerment and evidence tampering trial. The digital footprint I had provided was an inescapable iron cage. She was sentenced to 3 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The woman who had spent her entire adult life curating a flawless digital aesthetic was now wearing a shapeless orange jumpsuit in a concrete cell. There were no designer cosmetics or silk sheets in her current reality. She ate bland cafeteria food and slept on a thin, stiff cot, surrounded by the harsh noise of incarceration. Furthermore, her entire social media empire was wiped from the internet. The millions of followers, the lucrative brand sponsorships, the carefully filtered photographs of her glamorous vacations were permanently deleted. She was completely erased from the digital world, leaving behind absolutely nothing. She had spent years trying to make me feel invisible, and now she was literally a ghost trapped behind razor wire and steel bars. For my parents, the descent into absolute poverty was a slow psychological torture. The eviction from their sprawling mansion was a public spectacle. The bank algorithms did not care about Thomas' arrogant history or Brenda country club pedigree. Aegis Systems lawyers executed the foreclosure with clinical precision. Moving trucks arrived at dawn, loading up the antique furniture, the crystal chandeliers, and the expensive art collections to be auctioned off to satisfy their massive debts. Thomas stood on the manicured lawn of the estate he used to rule, watching the repo men carry away his entire legacy. The luxury cars were towed away from the circular driveway, while neighbors watched through parted blinds. Brenda frantically dialed the numbers of her elite friends, begging for temporary loans or a place to stay. Every single call went straight to voicemail. The superficial high society circle they had catered to their entire lives evaporated overnight. When you build your entire social existence on the foundation of wealth and status, your friendships vanish the exact second the money disappears. They were treated like a contagious disease, completely cut out of the social register. Stripped of their assets, their credit ruined, and their golden children locked in cages. Thomas and Brenda were forced into a life they had spent decades mocking. They currently resided in a cramped, cheap motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. The room smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial bleach. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the neon sign outside buzzed with a loud, annoying hum that kept them awake at night. Brenda spent her days staring blankly at the stained ceiling, while Thomas sat at the tiny, wobbly laminate table, shuffling through endless stacks of final notice bills. They were surviving on generic canned soup and instant coffee, a brutal contrast to the catered galas and imported caviar they once considered basic necessities. They had sacrificed their own daughter on the altar of status, and now that altar had crumbled beneath their feet, leaving them with nothing but the suffocating weight of their own failures. But pride is a stubborn disease, and survival makes people desperate. 6 months of eating canned food and listening to sirens wailing outside their thin motel room window finally broke their arrogant resolve. They realized they had exactly one lifeline left in the world: the daughter they had thrown away. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Thomas and Brenda stepped out of a cheap public bus and stood on the wet sidewalk. They stared up at the towering glass and steel monolith of the Aegis Systems global headquarters. The skyscraper dominated the city skyline, a physical manifestation of the empire I had built, while they were busy telling me I was worthless. They walked through the massive revolving doors, stepping into a sprawling lobby made of imported black marble and brushed titanium. The atmosphere was intimidating cold and dripping with absolute corporate authority. They stood in the center of the room, surrounded by executives and engineers moving with intense purpose. Nobody paid any attention to the two broken people lingering near the entrance. They were entirely insignificant in the ecosystem I had created. My parents approached the main reception desk looking like two exhausted, frightened strangers. Their clothes were wrinkled and their shoulders were slumped, carrying the heavy burden of their total defeat. Brenda swallowed her remaining pride and placed her trembling hands on the polished stone counter, looking up at the impeccably dressed security receptionist. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her voice shaking with a pathetic, desperate edge. "We are Riley Wilson parents. We know we do not have an appointment, but we really need to see our daughter. Please, we have nowhere else to go." The receptionist, a highly trained professional who handled hostile corporate takeovers and aggressive journalists with equal grace, simply stared at the two disheveled figures. She did not reach for a visitor badge. Instead, she pressed a discreet silver button beneath the edge of her desk, directly linking to the executive security detail. Before the receptionist could issue a polite but firm rejection, a soft chime echoed through the cavernous lobby. The brushed steel doors of the private executive elevator slid open. I stepped out onto the black marble floor. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute authority. My heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, an unmistakable sound of power that caused several junior executives in the lobby to immediately stand straighter. I stopped 10 feet away from the reception desk, folding my hands calmly in front of me. "Riley," Brenda gasped, her voice cracked, shattering into a pathetic, desperate sob. She shoved past a startled courier and practically ran toward me. Thomas followed closely behind her, dragging his feet, his shoulders hunched in absolute defeat. They looked entirely broken. The tailored designer wardrobes they had flaunted for decades were gone, replaced by wrinkled discount clothing that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap motel soap. "Oh, Riley, thank God," Brenda wept, reaching out with trembling hands. She tried to grab my arm, but my lead security director stepped forward, instantly placing his massive frame between us. Brenda recoiled, clutching her hands to her chest. "Riley, please, you have to help us. The motel is a nightmare. There are bugs everywhere. The people next door scream all night. We have no money for food." Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing in his throat. He tried to summon the old booming authority he had used to terrorize me during my childhood, but his voice came out as a weak, raspy croak. "Your mother is sick, Riley. My heart cannot take this stress. We lost everything. Jamal took everything from us. We have absolutely nothing left." I looked at them. I searched my own heart for even a single drop of pity, a tiny flicker of familial warmth. There was nothing. They were just two strangers who had placed a bad bet and lost. "We were thinking," Brenda continued, her words tumbling out in a frantic, rushing stream. "We know you have that beautiful penthouse downtown. It is so big, Riley. It has 5 bedrooms. We could take the guest wing. We would not be any trouble. We can help you host corporate dinners. We can be a family again. Just let us come home with you." I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her request hang in the cold air of the lobby. "Be a family again," I repeated. My voice was a flat, terrifying whisper that made Thomas physically flinch. Yes. Brenda nodded eagerly, fresh tears spilling down her pale cheeks. We are so sorry for everything. We will make it right. We just want to be your parents again. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp, heavy white envelope. I held it out, extending it past the security guard. Thomas reached forward with a shaking hand and took it. His fingers fumbled clumsily with the wax seal, tearing the heavy paper open. He pulled out a stack of legal documents bound by a thick blue ribbon. He stared at the top page, his eyes widening in total disbelief. What is it? Brenda asked, grabbing his arm. Thomas, what did she give us? It is a deed, Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and watery. The Lake Tahoe cabin. Brenda let out a sharp, gasping cry of joy. The mask of the destitute victim instantly vanished, replaced by the familiar, hungry gleam of high society greed. The tears stopped flowing. Her posture straightened. She looked at the deed as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Oh, Riley. Brenda laughed, a breathless, hysterical sound. I knew you still loved us. I knew you could not hold a grudge forever. Lake Tahoe is beautiful this time of year. We can call the interior decorators. We can fix up the master suite. It will be just like the old days. We can invite the country club board members up for the summer. I bought the cabin from the bank, I said, cutting off her delusional rambling. My voice was pure ice, dropping the temperature in the lobby to absolute zero. It is yours, fully paid off. Brenda smiled, reaching out to hug me again, but I took a deliberate step backward. It is a place to live. I continued my gaze, locking onto Brenda's eyes and stripping away every ounce of her joy. But this is the end. Do not call me. Do not look for me. Do not ever walk into this building again. Blood does not give you a free pass for cruelty. Brenda's smile completely collapsed. The color drained out of her face, leaving her looking gray and hollow. But Riley, she stammered. We are your parents. You cannot just banish us to a cabin in the woods. We belong in society. We belong with you. You belong exactly where you put yourselves, I replied coldly. When Kelsey left me to freeze to death in a canyon, you laughed. When I was lying in a hospital bed attached to a ventilator, you froze my bank accounts and threw me to the wolves. You chose your golden children. Now your golden son is bankrupt and facing federal prison, and your golden daughter is wearing a jumpsuit in a state penitentiary. I am giving you a roof over your heads because I am fundamentally better than you. That is the only reason you are not sleeping on the street tonight. Thomas looked down at the deed in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He finally understood. This was not a reconciliation. It was a severance package. Consider your debt paid in full, I said. We are permanently done. I turned my back on them without another word. I did not wait to hear Brenda begin weeping again. I did not wait to hear Thomas utter a pathetic apology. I walked directly past my security team and stepped into the private elevator. I turned around facing the lobby as the brushed steel doors began to slide shut. Brenda was on her knees, sobbing into her hands. Thomas was standing completely paralyzed, clutching the deed like a life preserver. The doors closed seamlessly, shutting them out of my life forever. The elevator accelerated smoothly, rocketing upward toward the highest floor of the skyscraper. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the quiet, pristine sanctuary of the executive suite. I walked down the long corridor, my heels sinking into the plush carpets, until I reached the double doors of the CEO office. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The office was massive, a sleek, modern monument to absolute victory, but it was the view that commanded the room. Entire walls made of flawless floor-to-ceiling glass looked out over the sprawling city of Denver and the jagged, majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains beyond. I walked slowly to the glass, resting my fingertips against the cool pane. I stared out at the distant snow-capped summits glittering aggressively in the morning sunlight. I remembered the blinding white of the blizzard. I remembered the suffocating ice freezing my lungs. I remembered the exact moment my heart had almost stopped beating in that frozen canyon. They had left me there to be buried under the ice. They had fully expected the storm to erase me. But the storm did not kill me. It forged me. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the warm, perfectly climate-controlled air fill my lungs. I looked down at the city sprawling beneath my feet, a vast, complex empire that I completely controlled. I had survived the absolute worst of their blizzard, both literally and metaphorically. I had walked through the freezing dark, and I had climbed the impossible mountain. And now, looking out over the world from the highest floor of my own skyscraper, I knew the absolute truth. I owned the summit.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.